third chapter. Now it's all about access, and in this track we're hearing from new voices who are trying to create change from the ground up in arts organisations, publishing and public broadcasting, and they're going to pose fundamental questions like what does it mean to become more diverse and how can we support new talent to thrive. Please welcome to the stage Gabrielle de la Puente and Zarina Muhammad from the White Pube, Millie Reilly, who's the literary agent from the Unwin literary agency, and Sonja Duschek, Head of Archive at Hessicher Rundfunk. Chairing the session is Isabel Cébrian of the Etopia Centre for Art and Technology. Isabel, over to you. Thank you very much. Give them a warm round of applause.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me and for having us today. My name is Isabel Cébrian. I'm a journalist and a cultural manager, and I work as a freelancer for Etopia Center for Art and Technology since like 3 years ago. When Abhai invited me to chair this table, I asked why, and he told me that it was a little bit inspired of a presentation I made in our last steering group meeting for Smart Places in Bilbao, where I share a little story about these almost 4 years working in Etopia and creating a team, or being part of a team, because I'm not responsible of creating it, but being part of it. Etopia, for those who don't know the center, Juan Pradas will tell you more about that. It's a center for creativity, public funded in the city of Zaragoza, and has an odd structure in the sense that is run by 2 heads and has some difficulties hiring people. So it has a small and very flexible structure, and it helps us to bring together a lot of diverse profiles, mostly very young profiles, technicians, biologists, and we were all under the same roof creating a program that will fulfill the mission of this organization, of this institution, which is creating the most innovative projects. And I don't know if we live to that expectation, creating the most innovative projects, but we tried hard. I'm going to give you a few examples of the activities we've been involved recently. For example, Conecta, which was the second Smart Places conference we held last year, that focused on mediation, participation, and diversity in the cultural sector. Or Innovative Citizen, a program that probably some of you know because it was a joint activity with this house, with Dortmunder U, which explored the maker culture, a field that we have experience in, but also with a twist of sustainability and a urban approach that brought us together with new agents in the city, so help us to open some doors. And also the Etopia Urban Festival that invited the young communities that already inhabited Etopia to come together and create a party and making them part of the organization of that event. I'm not going to talk in detail of our role in those projects because we need time for the table, and also because you can go to Smart Places website where we have been documenting all the processes and all the thoughts that along the way we've been having. But what is not written there are some keys that I think will be helpful for later for discussing with you. A few things that we will have loved to know before starting this 4-year journey, and also as I was writing them down, thinking that will be keys that will also help our audiences, not only us as a team, but also the people that come to Etopia. One is transparency. Because sometimes when you arrive to an institution, you don't know how things work, who holds the key, who has the resources you need, and that happened to us as a team, and also I guess sometimes happens to our users or to our visitors. The second one is democracy, or a democratic organization, because it's important not that everybody participates in every decision, but that people know how they can participate in the decisions, if they want to and if they have the chance to do that. Other things is the languages. I think we're going to talk about languages later, and you can talk to everybody in the same way. and understanding how you have to talk to some of the people you will encounter in your job is very important, and we have learned that along the way. And also, and this is very difficult also, is maybe having a compass that will show you who are the champions of the change in your institution, so you can come closer to them and bring them on board. And also who will be a stopper. Somebody will make some resistance to change, so you can also convince them to come on board. So I think all the speakers here might have some thoughts about that, four concepts that I already mentioned. You already did the introduction, but I'm going to introduce them again a little bit more. Gabrielle de la Puente and Zarina Muhammad, they are the two women behind the White Pube, an internet-based project from where they write criticism, exhibit, and curate. Reilly, who works at the Unwin literary agency, and she's building now her own list of fiction and non-fiction authors. And Sonja Duschek was leading the digitalization and change of the archive department of Hessicher Rundfunk. I'm not going to say that right, which is basically the public broadcaster of a region here in Germany. So you can go now. I think you should start.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for inviting us. We were thinking at lunch about this question of like, can digital enable new talent to thrive in our institutions, and just the general subject of today's conference. And I think as 25-year-olds, we've got like a different relationship with the digital in general, where it's kind of confusing that someone would put a conference on around it, because for us it's just like so native, so inherent. Of course it is. Next.
Like, we've never had to kind of organise to think around it. It's just been an intuitive use of the digital. It's like whether it's with our website or when we're working with institutions, because we're not an institution in the sense that I think we've been talking about it today. So the question for us was a little bit stickier than it has been in like the previous tracks, because in a way, like, what happens when institutions take it upon themselves to nurture talent with or without the digital? Like, what happens when institutions become incubators for talent that kind of exists in different ways outside of itself?
Mm-hmm. And we're going to shift now into like a bit of an artist talk so that you can catch up on the mad 4 years we've had. So we met when we were doing fine art in Central St. Martin's, and we were part of a university that is quite known for its, I don't know how, the best way to put it, and I do not know if this will translate, is like CSM is known for breeding gobshites, like people who are quite outspoken, political. We might not have been the best artists, but we could definitely talk about art. And when we were in our final year of university, we had this realization very early on that we don't read the things that the university tells us to read. We get the books out of the library and then we renew them until the university library is like, give them back. We just don't care. The tutors would say, subscribe to Freeze, subscribe to Art Review, blah, blah, blah. And I would, for some reason, waste my student loan on these things. And it would be like Cartier adverts and Gucci and really boring write-ups of exhibitions that just say, da-da-da-da-da, this is when it ends. And I think we were conscious of that, but it wasn't until this very specific day when we were like, that's not good enough. Like, why are we part of this cultural industry that is so boring and so exclusionary when it comes to almost like it's fan fiction? Yeah.
So I think before we started, we were very aware that like art writing is alienating, and if it exists on two ends of the spectrum between like journalism, when you know whether it gets published in like a broadsheet or online, however that exists, but like kind of fundamentally describing the things in the room, and then hard, impenetrable theory on the other end of that spectrum, we kind of wanted to make something completely outside of that, that referenced the body, that spoke about art in an experiential way, that kind of treated it like it was a weird thing, because it is quite a weird thing. Like it's quite mad when you go into a gallery and then you're just expected to kind of acclimatize immediately, and the rest of your day or the rest of your week isn't quite as intense as that.
Yeah.
So we've been writing about art for 4 years, writing about exhibitions, the shape of institutions, their interactions with everyone from like artists of colour to disabled artists. We've got specific critical interests in the way institutions interact with marginalised artists, whatever that comes to mean. But yeah, we've been doing it all online.
So we had this kind of moment where we were like, no, it's not good enough. Let's, as a joke, start something ourselves. And we said, oh, what should we call it? And Zarina went, the white pube. And it was like divine intervention, because the white pube then took the piss out of the white cube, which is not only famous gallery chain, but also this kind of theory that art is best viewed in this perfect white magical space. The name mocks age, it mocks whiteness, it mocks kind of everything that we felt like we were in opposition to or were not being served by. So we had the name, I legged it to GoDaddy.com and got thewhitepube.com domain name. And we also got @thewhitepube on Twitter in that day. And we spent, that was a Monday, and by the Saturday we'd started to write about exhibitions ourselves and publish them. And for the past 4 years now, we've published something new every Sunday. And it's kind of been like this whole whirlwind that has taken us to conferences in Germany. And we went to Norway 4 times last year, and we've got a crazy audience of like, I think roughly it's 12,000 monthly visits on the website alone every month. Our biggest audiences are in London, New York, and then this month, Germany. We have been, I mean, I'm not saying this to brag, I'm just saying it because it's crazy, like being flown to New York, to Rhode Island to become the Rhode Island School of Design Global Initiative speakers. Just all these crazy things that would never have happened if in that moment we hadn't have had the ease and the knowledge and the facilities to make a website. And it was something that really did so naturally happen and so quickly as well, and something that we were able to maintain in a way that would never have happened if it was print, journalism, if we were trying to become like these other writing institutions of Frieze, Art Forum, etc. We didn't have the money to do that. We didn't even know, I don't really know how to even print things or how you so get an audience to distribute amongst. Like all of that was just, no, not interested.
Yeah. I think with it being a website and then the Twitter and the Instagram, we've got several things that like print just doesn't have. It's like the speed at which we can publish. I can write something on Saturday night and publish it on Sunday. It happens a lot more often than you think. And like that speed of like thinking and writing and publishing, we definitely don't take that for granted. It means that we can respond to things in a way that's reactionary, but like in a good way. We can be reactive. We don't have to necessarily jump through loads of bureaucratic hoops.
Because we don't get edited, because I'm never going to tell Zarina there's not something she can't say. And I think what has happened with the White Pube is its audience and just generally the conversations we'll have. Like, people come to us now as if we're Artists Anonymous, and they're like, these are all the bad things that happen, and then we know them, and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to die.
That speed definitely translates not just to publishing on the website, but onto Instagram as well. We can be really reactive when it comes to things like
today, for example. A white British, I think she's British, Raquel, something,
Nice.
has gotten in touch with a Vietnamese artist and said, I'm not going to show your work in this upcoming fair in Battersea because you're Vietnamese and coronavirus, it's not going to look too good.
Basically, we can't have an Asian manning the stall because
So-
it'll put the buyers off.
So, people like in that group can then send us the screenshots and then we can just put them on Instagram. It's like this really kind of I don't know. I think that's a really powerful place to be in the art world, and a powerful resource for an audience as well, because we want to try and have everyone's backs and to call out these ways of working and this politeness. And we're not here to make friends, we're critics, unfortunately, but we're able to be nimble because of the digital.
And I think as well, there are so many within this consideration of the cultural industries and whatever strategies they might be adopting, there perhaps is a little bit of oversight in the sense that, like, this is an industry that proclaims itself to be incredibly progressive, incredibly liberal, and yet somehow these abuses of power still happen, these, abuses of power, and also, like, it's this weird kind of stodgy conservatism that leaks simultaneously into neoliberal thought that never really gets interrogated, and there's not really any kind of person neutral from that can hold people to account and speak truth to power. Like, there's no art version of WikiLeaks.
Yet.
But
I feel like we're on this little island where we can say what we want, we know how to do it, and even the way we make money, often we'll dip in and do talks like this so that we can grab money from the institutions and run. But also we're funded by our patrons. We use Patreon in order to have a wage for the writing that we do. All of the money we do make is published on our accounts, which is just a page on the website. Like, for the past 4 years, every single job that we've done is transparent, which I think everyone should do.
Yeah. I think as well, like, it's not just the speed of things. We can also, like, play with scale. I think we project an image that's bigger than ourselves. So when it comes to things like the Patreon, it is really useful because fundamentally this is just two of us, and we're writing week in, week out for the past 4 years. I think we take December off, and we've taken December off for the past 2 years. 2 years?
Yeah.
Really taken?
I think so. Yeah.
No, 3 years.
Okay.
We've taken 3 Decembers off. But like, otherwise it's 24/7. We've both got this very peculiar habit of eating with our phones screen down, because otherwise it's like the digital is a fucking interruption. And with that scale, because it's just us, I think if this was on a slightly larger scale, it also simultaneously wouldn't work. It would be too much, there'd be too much admin. We've managed to circumvent the bureaucracy involved in publishing.
Through scale, through deciding to stay small. And so I think ultimately our conclusion is that we're more interested in setting up new things outside of the institution and things that you can kind of keep your arms around and you don't lose control of in order to keep some integrity.
I think institutions, when it comes to institutions in like using the digital to interact with younger audiences, perhaps there needs to be a conversation around things that are already happening, because younger marginalized audiences have this ability to use the digital as a tool completely intuitively, and they use it in a way that's very specific. Like, it's used to plug the gap where the institution perhaps hasn't been a place that they can call their own, where they haven't had agency to make and disrupt in the way that they are without it. And I think institutions, a better place to start, instead of thinking about it as something that can be homegrown, thinking about it as something that can tap into activity that's already existing, is perhaps a better place to start from, and doing that in a way that doesn't co-opt or take the radical edge off the politic that already exists there. So basically the only thing that institutions bring to the table is funding. Give young people your money. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you, for sharing your vision and your experience. We can discuss a little bit later. Just let me recommend people who haven't got into your website and haven't read all your writing, because it's really good, it's really refreshing, really interesting. So check out the examples of what they do and how it reflects this very reactive, in a good way, way of staying and seeing to the world of art. So, yeah. And now I will give to the stage, Millie. Thank you.
Hello. So, hi, I'm Millie Reilly. I'm a literary agent at the Unwin Literary Agency, or JULA for short. I've been working at JULA for 3 years now. I started as Jo's assistant, my boss, and worked for her for 2 years, and then for the past year, I've been a literary agent in my own right, building up a list of authors of literary fiction and non-fiction. And in preparation for this conference, I've been thinking a lot about change, how change applies to the publishing industry generally on kind of a broader scale, and how it applies more specifically to my job. One of the real pushes for change in the industry at the moment is a recognition of the urgent need to redress the balance of stories that are being published at the moment. So currently, mainstream publishing is unfortunately weighted towards stories that are typically voices that are typically white and very often middle class or even upper class. And there's a recognition that that needs to change, that the stories we need to publish need to be more representative of the range of human experiences in our world. In this talk, I'm going to begin by describing the kinds of books I work on as a literary agent. I'll talk about the work that an agent does, and as I do so, I want to consider what the responsibilities of an agent are, both in terms of how we choose which authors we work with, but also the way in just we work with authors on a day-to-day level. Books operate on a really, really personal level, both for author and reader alike. And I hope that by the end of this talk, as I recognise the big changes across the industry that need to happen, that I also want to draw attention to the kind of cumulative value in the small changes that are possible through day-to-day work, just in the way that you work with people, and that there is a real weight and importance to that. So I've always been a big reader, and though the books I read are fairly varied, what always interests me is the same, and that is people. I love books that let you observe people, let you watch people, kind of let you into their lives. And one of my favourite authors is an author called Elizabeth Strout, who I think writes about people so well, in a way that feels really honest, really unjudgmental, and very accurate. And I recently watched an interview with Strout about the adaptation of one of her plays to the stage, and she said, one of her novels to the stage. And she said that she wanted people to leave the theatre feeling, and this is a quote, that they had entered someone's life momentarily, and that they felt for the characters, and they understood something more about themselves as a result. And this struck me as an experience that's true not only to Strout's books, but also more generally to the kind of books that I love and that I'm really interested in, and the kind of books that I want to work on as a literary agent. So generally, as I build the list of authors I work with, I have a really clear sense of the books that I am going to be working on. So currently I work with 7 authors, and I think it's fair to say that in different ways, people are at the heart of the books they write. And as I grow the list of authors I work with, I want the books that I help to put out into the world to be broad and representative, and, if it's not too grand to say, to help us understand partly what it is to be human, even if that is in just kind of one tiny glimpse or one small way. So, if you've written a book that you want to get published, there are lots of different ways that you can go about doing this. You can self-publish your work, you can take your work to a publisher directly, or you can get a literary agent. So the way that an agent works generally is they'll work editorially with an author on their book, then they send the book out to the publishers, and then, with any luck, they'll negotiate the book deal at the end of the process. What that means is, for better or worse, agents do act as a kind of gatekeeper, because they're the stage of selection before a book reaches the publisher. And what I want to think about a bit in this talk is the responsibility that comes with that, both in terms of how you choose the books that you work on, but also how you interact with the writers that you work with, and also the unpublished writers who are submitting their work to you. So as an agency, I'd say online and offline, we try and present our agency as kind of friendly and approachable and down to earth as possible. I think when you're an unpublished writer, the publishing industry can often seem quite opaque, sometimes a bit exclusionary, and definitely in the way we present ourselves, we want to kind of offset that as much as possible and be as helpful as we can be. And I think that's really important just for me generally as well. As I set out, I don't ever want to be the kind of literary agent who's very aloof or grand. I kind of just want to be approachable and helpful. And there are really simple ways that you can go about that. So we get a lot of contact from unpublished authors on a day-to-day basis, by phone and by email, and make it a point to help them as much as we can and is reasonable, really, I suppose, within the commercial pressures of a normal working day. And similarly, we get a lot of submissions of work from authors, and we make a point of replying to every submission that we receive. So we have an open submissions process, and we receive our submissions by email, which means that in theory, any author can send us their work to read. There are 3 agents at JULA in total, and each of us receive about 10 to 15 submissions a day. But what's crucial is that we take on authors really rarely. So in total, it'd be one of us would likely take on one author once a month about, and that means that in total as an agency, we're taking on about 12 clients a year. Because it takes a lot of time and work and energy to develop a book, so we have to make sure we're taking on authors in the right circumstances. But what that does also mean is that we're rejecting a lot of work that is often very brilliant, which can be a part of my job that I struggle with a bit. And I think in general, there can be a sense of pressure when it comes to the submissions process, both because of the kind of quantity that we receive and also the fear that you could be the agent that like misses the next big book. And I think that that is something that possibly exists across cultural industries with the rise of the digital, that although it feels like this kind of freeing of new talent, it also can breed sometimes a sense of helplessness or indecision just because there is so much to read, or so like you're having to get through so much. So I might spend a morning working my way through submissions, and then I like click out of my inbox, and there are more than I started with. So sometimes it feels like it can be tricky, in all honesty. But that said, I really don't want to sound pessimistic about it, because it is also genuinely a real opportunity to find new talent. And when you kind of stumble across an amazing piece of writing that has just been like sitting like tucked away in your inbox, it is an amazing feeling. So I think that is just the kind of what I've learned more and more through my work, is just the need to always approach submissions in the right frame of mind, which is to say kind of with a very clear sense of purpose, and when you're feeling like you can properly concentrate and you're reading with a genuinely open mind. And as I go on, I want to think a bit more about the responsibility that comes with finding new authors. So when you take on an author, in theory, you're taking them on for their whole career, which means that at the same time as we're finding new authors, we're also working with the authors that we currently represent, who very often are writing new books that require our time and attention. So what that means is that there are a limited number of seats at the table. There are only so many authors that we can work with. So it is really important that as a company, we're thinking strategically and progressively about the authors that we represent, so that we're not all representing authors who are writing from similar experiences or similar books. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that we need to make sure that we're not overlooking voices that are underrepresented in mainstream publishing, and that our work is genuinely inclusive. In quite a practical sense, as I said at the beginning, there are big radical changes that need to be made in publishing generally if it's to become more inclusive and more fair than it currently is. However, there are lots of companies who are doing really exciting work, I think, to make it a more progressive place. And to name just a very few, there's The Good Agency, Murky Books, and Dialogue Books, all of which focus specifically on publishing brilliant writing from voices that are often excluded from the mainstream, be that writers of colour, or working class writers, or LGBT writers, or writers of disability. That's kind of their mission statement. But as an agency at JULA, we don't have a mission statement that focuses specifically on diversity and inclusivity in the same way that these companies do, but it is very much driving the work that we do and of like real importance to all of us. We are very often cited as an agency that represents a diverse range of authors, but I think it is important to say that we feel that it should be a lot more diverse than it currently is. And I'd say that the way that we're trying to address that is, and approach it, is from a slightly different angle to the companies I mentioned a second ago. And our tactic is to represent brilliant writing by authors from all backgrounds with a particular focus on stories that might not yet have been heard or that very often have something important to say. And basically, we want to create a statement about the work that we do through the books that we're helping to publish. And so through our experience, we have noticed that the books we work on have a real domino effect on the authors who submit to us. For example, last year, one of our biggest books was a novel called Queenie by an author called Candice Carty-Williams. The book follows its heroine, Queenie, who's a black woman in her 20s who's living in London and struggling. And it's been a massive success. It's been a bestseller, nominated for lots of prizes, and critically it's also shown that there is a real appetite for stories that don't always hit mainstream publishing, which in this case is just intelligent commercial women's fiction with a black female protagonist. And interestingly for us, following the publication of Queenie, we saw a real spike in the submissions we received from authors of colour who specifically referenced how that book had influenced their choice in wanting to work with us, which makes sense. But for me, it's also really vital as I set out, it's kind of been a vital thing to take away as I kind of set out as a new agent in the industry, as it's shown that the authors I represent now are also kind of setting the tone for the work that I'm going to be doing in the future, which feels really important. And I'd say an interesting thing about the change that's possible through my job in general is it is only in my control to a certain extent. I can try and make my work as accessible and transparent as possible so as to encourage many different writers to submit to me. But critically, I can't control what authors contact me, and I can't control, I'd say more importantly, I can't control what they choose to write. But I think for me that feels really exciting because it means that the change that's possible is very much collaborative and very much me responding kind of to their own ideas and their stories. I've learned that working with writers on their book can be a really intimate process, as the book is very often very close to the author or very close to their experience, or both. And a really wonderful part of my job can be the point at which you succeed in getting a book deal. Sometimes the road there can take a long time, so the point at which you get there is a really wonderful moment, and it feels like a very positive change to the author's life, to my life, the company's life. Just feels like a good thing in general. But then when you go beyond that as well, then once the book is published, then I think there's a really exciting kind of unknown element of change in that that book is going to speak to its readers in some unknown way, which I can never know what that is. It might really annoy them, it might move them, it might change them, whatever that is, that feels like an exciting thing. And so I suppose what I want to finish by saying is that while there are big changes that are needed in publishing, I think there's also a real value in the small changes that have a cumulative effect. While I certainly hope that at some point in my career I might work on a groundbreaking book or something that really changes people's perspective on things, I certainly wouldn't say that's the kind of change that drives my work. I think rather what is a much bigger driving force is a real interest in people, in how people can communicate and understand one another through books. And I basically want to be a part of the smaller changes that are possible in that, both for the authors that I work with, but also the readers that they're writing for. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie, for sharing your experience. I also think that these little changes are accumulative and
And when you see the effect of what you're doing in your industry, it must be as rewarding as getting out those new voices. I'm going to get some recommendations from you later for my readings. And now is the turn for Sonja to share her experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. So that's the wrong page. Thank you. As Isabel already told you, I work at the archive department of a public broadcaster here in Germany. And since August, I'm in a new job position. I'm head of the team information service within the archive department of Hessicher Rundfunk. And from next year on, I will be in a joint leadership as head of archive with my colleague Katharina. Katharina and I, we will address a big challenge this year. Our assignment is to find a new future-proof structure for our department, and we're about 50 people, that will help us to face prospective challenges. You all know that media consumption is changing. For decades, TV and radio were the primary devices. And today, you can simply use apps on your mobiles. If we, as public service media, want to stay relevant, we have to change. In order to still fulfill our mission of reaching all social groups, our management decided that we needed a change of strategy, which is called Digital First. Amongst other things, this means that we need to produce more and better products for our digital products, for our apps and websites. But as you already know, I work at the archive department. So what does Digital First mean for us? I'm going to give you some examples, and I will talk to you about the challenges we are facing. As an archive, you have two main tasks. First, archiving content, and second, providing access to this content, and in our case, also providing access to information and knowledge for our journalists. A lot of people would describe archives as a stable and reliable thing. There are a lot of standards and rules and safety precautions with a long tradition. You could even say that people of our trades have a work-related characteristic. We do not like change, not at all. Change means risk, and in an archive, you avoid risk whenever possible. It is our job to preserve, to make sure everything lasts forever, and that you can find the content even many, many years later. But with the change in strategy to digital first, we, the archive department, we need to change too. In such a big organization, the processes of the departments are very much coordinated, and some of them are interconnected like gear wheels. So what are we doing? Until today, we offer a research service. But as most journalists are able to do their own research via the internet by now, maybe we have to shift our focus to verification services and fact-checking, preventing and debunking fake news. Or what about automation? As a fact, by now, some of our work can be done by software. We are actually working on using more technologies like speech-to-text or image recognition. And there always will be new technology or new procedures. It won't be enough to change this one time, and then we're all like, whew, this was hard, but yes, now it's done. Changing is going to be the only constant. So we have to find ways and means to deal with that. I want to share one very specific example of how we want to contribute to the overall goal, digital first, and that is at the same time one of the things that I really want to accomplish. Open up our digital archive for the public. I want us to give access to everybody to all the special content that has been produced over the years. I would love if people could dig through our archive reminiscing, grandparents showing their grandchildren what their world looked like. Maybe someday we could even link our content in Wikipedia so people can find even more relevant information right where they look for it. But to achieve this, there are still some legal obstacles to overcome. We are working on them together with other archives, and I'm optimistic that we can share our oldest content online later this year. And how do we change the work culture inside of our department? And what team structure do we need to open up in general? how can we become future-proof, and what does that mean anyway? If I say that, I don't mean future-proof in regard of a time span. I'm more thinking of a condition or a state of mind. I want us to be capable of handling constant change. Not everybody needs to become a change manager, but I want everybody to have the chance to develop some helpful skills, like dealing with failure or giving and receiving valuable feedback. My colleague Katharina and I, we spend a lot of our time communicating, as we think it's the most important thing to do. I believe there's a big chance in transparency about what the goals are, about what we want to do, and even about the fact that sometimes we don't have a clue about how to make progress. I want us to be a living example of trial and error. I encourage everybody to be open-minded and brave and respectful. In that way, we can build an environment of safety and trust, where people dare to open up and try new things without the paralyzing fear of failing. In regard of our communication, I want to give you also some very practical examples. One tool that we introduced is our kitchen Kanban. It's like a regular Kanban board, but it's on a wall in our open kitchen where everybody has access to it. And we are using it to provide transparency about the change process in general, but also about ongoing projects. So everybody can inform themselves just by looking at this Kanban board. As we don't have a lot of free time, because Katharina and I, we are attending a lot of meetings, a big part of our communication is digital too. We use tools like Trello for collecting and sharing ideas, or as a shared to-do list, where we can work together independently of time and location. We use a lot of email to make sure we have the same information about ongoing projects, and for emergencies, that's maybe a little bit old-fashioned, we use text messages. But if I got a text message from Katharina, I know it's important, and the other way around. We try to communicate the why we need to change very clear and very often. But I can happily say that most of our teams are aware of that need of change as much as we are and are eager to work together. However, we notice that often what we want to say can be understood in many different ways. Even between us, Katharina and me, it shows that sometimes we just have a different understanding, and it's possible that in the middle of the conversation we notice that, and we are like, wait, do we really have the same idea of this concept? It's so important to get into a dialogue and really listen to each other. The same applies to the communication with the teams, not talking about each other, but with each other. It sounds so simple and is yet so hard, and it needs a lot of time. And speaking of time, we are providing time and space to talk to us in private, but also in the team meetings. Katharina and I offer a weekly office hour for our staff to talk to us about their ideas, their concerns, or just to inform themselves about the change process. Another form of communication is giving and receiving feedback. I learned from a very smart woman called Elisabeth Böhm that it is very important to talk to everybody on your team regularly and to make sure everybody knows what you're thinking about them and their work. She explained, make sure that if you wake somebody up in the middle of the night and you ask her or him, what do I think about you? They are able to answer right away. Of course, this requires that I give feedback regularly. And honestly, I really try to give helpful feedback to my colleagues, but that is one thing I'm still struggling with. Being honest about my expectations is not easy for me. I'm good at giving the nice feedback, and I do this quite often, but I don't always feel comfortable to talk about what could have been better or when I think somebody underperformed. I feel that it's hard for me because I haven't experienced this kind of feedback culture in the workplace. A long time there was this general rule, their silence is praise enough. But as I am a leader now, I'm trying to learn and use feedback methods, and I really put a lot of time and effort in preparing such meetings. I think that one of the factors for success, for living a culture of change, is that we as leaders have to be available and responsive to our teams. At least that's what we're trying to do. For me, it's a lot about empathy and listening to each other. With this change of strategy to digital first, I see so many opportunities for us to reinvent ourselves and to help our journalists creating meaningful digital content for everybody. We just started this process, so I can't tell you yet what the outcome will be, but I'm very optimistic that we will learn a lot this year, and I'm sure we will be growing with this. I would love to jump forward a year from now, telling you how nothing had happened the way I thought it would, but everything is fine now and things are going great. Thank you.
Thank you also for sharing your experience, and we look forward to see what you've achieved in 1 year. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. I think we still have the time to do that. I was thinking from your presentation, Sonja, that you are sharing your role with somebody else. You too, Gabrielle, Zarina, also work as a team, and sometimes indistinguishable. I don't know how to say that. You understand that sometimes you use the same voice. As you are, one collective instead of two separate people. I don't know how it's for Millie to work with a team, so maybe I would like to hear your experiences on that, on sharing your role with people and sharing a goal and a mission with other people like you.
Should I start? Yeah. So I really like to be in a joint leadership because I'm a team player, and I really love that you can, pick each other's brains, and also that you can share the responsibility. I really like that. It feels a lot lighter, and I think the outcome of working together, even as a team, it's always better than doing it alone. And if I had to say one thing that I think is maybe not so easy, then it's the time-consuming part of it. You have to talk a lot if you want to, be a unit, and if you want to that people see you as a unit, you have to talk a lot to each other. Yeah.
Well, I suppose in my job it's quite collaborative two ways. So it's the way that you're working with an author, but also the way that I work with the team. So in total, there are 4 of us at JULA, so 3 agents and Donna as well, who's an assistant and also going to be an agent soon, I think. I can't speak for other agencies, and in fact, this is the only agency I've worked for, but in our company, we're really collaborative. And you're right, it does take time, but it's so helpful. We'll all try and read each other's books that we represent, and it makes such a massive difference, because especially when you've been the only one reading a book on like maybe say like 5 to 7 iterations of it, it starts to become difficult to see kind of the wood from the tree sometimes when you're so far in it. So being able to just talk about it with a member of the team who has also read it makes such a big difference. But yeah, you're right, it's like if you need to read a whole book for someone else in the team, it takes time, right? But it is really to the benefit of everyone. And I don't know, when other people have read like one of the books of authors I represent, I find it so helpful, but also I'm just like really appreciative of, because it's a real investment, but I think it is definitely worthwhile. Yeah.
I think like we often joke that in university, we in first and second year we weren't best friends, and then I think we had shared interests. We made similar art, and through doing the White Pube, like our lives are just like in sync. Like we've probably got a better relationship with each other than like I do with my boyfriend, because we've never had a fight. We had one fight once about whether or not you should use conditioner.
Yeah. The answer is categorically do use conditioner.
I disagree. Anyway, but it's been really helpful. This like sharing responsibility, I think, is a really good way of putting it. Like if we've gotten ourselves into a situation, it's nice to be able to hand over to the other person to try and make sense of it.
But I think as well for us, collaboration has been such a specific experience. Like, I'm like in Gabrielle saying that we have like kind of the perfect collaboration. Like, I very much agree, but I'm also simultaneously like painfully aware that it could go horribly wrong if it was anyone else. Like, I think we are, someone described us as, was it describing us as simpatico?
Yeah. They were describing someone else, but we realised that we are.
Yeah. But like in that, I think it's quite nice to collaborate with someone who you know has got your back in like such a complete sense. But I think that has been so key for our collaboration and the nature of what we do. That I think if you were a different person and had different opinions and valued different things, I think it wouldn't work. So it's like such a specific thing. I don't know.
I agree that working with a team that has your back is like, as I was talking about champions for change before, that what I was meaning, like the first champions are seated right next to you, and then you have to go and find others. I was asking that because also I'm guessing that not only your direct partners, but in the change you are trying also to make you have encountered or other champions for that, and also some resistance to that change. And if we have the time, I will love to hear a little bit about who's the champion of your change outside your own organization, outside your own project. And yeah, let's take it to the positive. And if you have encountered some resistance, how have you overcome that?
I can tell you a little bit about it. So most of our team members are really enthusiastic about working about this change and working together. And I think that's a really privileged situation to be in because there's not a lot of resistance. And I think some of them are just curious about what the new leadership will bring and what we're going to do. And even I think this is more observant, like wait and see. It's not really resistance. But if there would be some resistance, I think there will be, because it's statistics, there has to be some resistance. I think we can't and won't put all of our energy into them, because you can't like change them to be happy about change. You just have to concentrate on the more positive team members, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Word to say to that, because we're going to have to wrap up quite quickly. If you can condense
I've got nothing interesting.
Yes, well, I think I will say that I think that for example, for you to have an agency that backs you up, I think that's a great support, of course. And the publishing industry would be the one that's reluctant to include these voices, but when they found out that this means also success for both parts, they will turn the back. And for you also having institutions that will host your discourse, I don't know, I think you might see them as a champion for that, or maybe you have a more critical approach to that as well, as you already mentioned. So I don't know, I think this is the change is a process. The change is something that keeps going, and will be lovely to hear from a year from now how you're doing with your project. So yeah, that's the closing.
Wonderful discussion. I'm so sorry to have rushed it, but thank you very much to you.